Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of the eShop Action Committee. I'm Daan Koopman. I'm here with Marc Flury from Drool.
Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
I'm great, thanks.
You're one of the guys behind Thumper, which just recently released on Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, that's right. It came out just less than a week ago.
Yeah, that's sort of insane. We're gonna have a whole bunch of discussion about the game, but first, just introduce yourself to the public and your experiences in making games.
Sure. So again, my name is Marc Flury. I'm American. I grew up in the United States, and I started my game career back in 2005. I started working at Harmonix in Boston, and I joined Harmonix at the exact right time. It was right when they had just begun development on the first Guitar Hero.
Wow.
So I got to kind of be part of the excitement behind that game and, of course, the Rock Band games that followed. And I was there for about 6 years. And then about 6 years ago, in 2011, I moved to Seoul, Korea with my wife. Yeah, and that's where I am now. And also about 7 years ago, a little over 7 years ago, is when I started making Thumper. And I did that with my friend Brian Gibson. He also worked at Harmonix. He's also the bassist for the band Lightning Bolt. So Thumper was just a collaboration between the two of us, and it was a really long process. It took us over 7 years, and finally now it's come out on a bunch of platforms, and most recently the Switch.
So, a couple of points there. You worked at Harmonix for quite a while. Do you have any particular fond memories of working there?
Yeah, I have a lot. I mean, there's a lot of cool people there, very creative people like who are do interesting things both at Harmonix and outside of Harmonix. A lot of musicians and artists. I'm a programmer, by the way, so
yeah, for sure.
It was my first like game programming job. Making games is kind of what I always wanted to do, and at Harmonix, the work I did was. It was really fun to be involved in the projects, right? Because there were these really big projects that like millions of people played, and like in particular, like I was the lead programmer on Beatles Rock Band.
Wow!
Which meant I got to meet Yoko Ono, who I've always really admired for her artistic work and stuff. She's really cool, I think.
That's insane. That's awesome.
Yeah, she came to our office just to check out how our virtual John Lennon was looking and give her feedback on it, which I thought was really cool of her.
That's really nice.
Yeah. And then, I think creatively and technically, like what I did at Harmonix was like pretty specific. I did a lot of menu programming and user interface programming, a little bit of managing other programmers. But what I really wanted to do was like make my own kind of, pursue my artistic dreams. And that's what Thumper ended up being. And so Brian and I, we just started working on it nights and weekends. And then it just snowballed into like, let's quit our jobs and like let's spend years making this game.
Wow. One more thing before we go into Thumper. You are involved with the indie scene in South Korea. While I have seen some games come out of there, I'm quite interested in hearing what that community is like.
Sure. So it's funny because when I lived in Boston, there was obviously a big game developer community there, but maybe I was just too burned out after, my day job or one of the problems is when you work at big companies, like you don't really get to choose what you're working on, and you also can't necessarily talk about what you're working on with other developers. So when I moved to Korea, of course I knew nobody here. I couldn't speak a word of Korean when I moved here 6 years ago. And so it was a priority for me personally just to meet other developers. And that turned into like now we have like a monthly meetup where we hang out, and it's a good mix of like both foreigners who are just living in Korea and making games as well, of course, Korean developers. And I'm kind of in a unique position where like I'm probably the only developer who made a Switch game in Korea yet, because of course the Switch isn't even out in Korea yet.
Right.
But I also help organize this big festival in Busan every year called Busan Indie Connect. The next one will be in September, and it's like a kind of a big international festival. If you've heard of Bit Summit in Japan, it's kind of like that. And I've just seen like this will be the third year we're doing it, and like the quality and both the number of interesting games and the quality of the games like keeps going up and up. So Yeah, I'm excited about everything that's happening in Korea for sure.
That's really interesting. I really like that. To start about Thumper, can you give the people like a quick overview what the game is all about?
Sure. So Thumper is a game where you are a little space beetle going through a very kind of abstract, psychedelic, occasionally scary world. It's kind of at its core a rhythm action game, but we
Mm-hmm.
didn't really want it to feel like other music games. We wanted it to feel really intense, really physical, really fast. And so we kind of coined this term rhythm violence to describe what it's like. And it's not violent in the sense there's no blood or gore.
Sure.
I think it's fine for children to play. It might be a little scary for some children, but um, and it kind of just came from Brian and I wanting to just like take an idea and go really far with it. And I did all the programming on the game. Brian did all the art and music, and I think it was just like kind of a realization of his artistic vision, and over many years we kind of just discovered what was fun about this type of simple rhythm gameplay, and that's what became Thumper.
All right. So where did that idea initially come from? Because you have been working for 7 years on it, right?
Yeah, so I mean, it was never the plan to work that long on it, but the
Right.
way it kind of happened was actually, Brian and I worked at Harmonix, but it was a pretty big company, and we never actually worked together or anything. And
Hmm.
on his own, he kind of had an idea for a really simple rhythm game, and it was kind of just where like you were controlling this little guy who was kind of like a little sphere, and you were moving along a grid and turning left and right. And he actually pitched it internally at Harmonix as like a game that could be potentially prototyped, and it was rejected. No, like the management at Harmonix wasn't interested in developing it.
I
And
see.
so I think he kind of messed around with it with some of his friends for a while, and none of them were programmers. And then so finally, Brian and I just started talking, and we just kind of were unified with this idea. Like we want to kind of just make this kind of like less like a company, just more like a band, for our artistic um, goals. And I mean, it's the reason I think most indie developers like do it, right? It's just they want to do their own thing.
Sure.
And and so, I think like on our YouTube channel, for example, we have these old prototypes of the game. It's like it's like this, it looks like an Atari vector game where you're moving on a grid and turning left and right. And it
Huh.
was a lot different than how it ended up. So I think we just kind of believed in ourselves and convinced ourselves that we could actually do it, even though it was like this mountain of work. And that's like the kind of the trick to staying motivated is like tricking yourself that you can actually do it. Because back then, like I didn't know how to do graphics programming. I wasn't nearly as good at programming,
Right.
and we ended up building our own engine. Right, we don't use Unity or anything. It's a custom engine, so that's why it took so long. And it was much, I think, a learning experience as it was like a creative experience.
I see. Um, I know you prefer to call the game a rhythm violence game, which I feel like describes the game perfectly. Was this vision always as clear as day, or did it progress as time went along?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, no, it definitely kind of evolved. Like when we started out, honestly, I don't know if I really even believed in the game.
I
Of course, we
see.
didn't even know what the game was, but it was going to be kind of about moving on a grid, and the innovation was going to be like it's a rhythm game, but you can change directions. You're not just always like going down a highway.
Right.
And for a long time, we kind of pursued the idea that this grid would be what is interesting about the game. But the more we worked on it, the more we just found it got fun when it just went faster and faster, and everything felt more and more like powerful and
Hmm.
intense. And so we kind of kept pushing it in that direction. And then rhythm violence was something like probably only a couple years ago we came up with that term, and it's just something that people like instantly responded to. Like when we say like, if I tell someone like, oh, it's a game where you're a beetle moving down a track and it's kind of like Guitar Hero, people just like are not very interested. If I say it's a rhythm violence game, then they're interested. They're like most people like get a little bit interested at least. So
That's cool.
it's just one of these things where we just kind of uh, tried it out and it just sort of stuck.
The game throws you like into the deep and lets you learn the mechanics as you go along. It was one of the most intense tutorials I've ever played. How fun is it to see players like figure it out for the first time?
It's great. And that's definitely what we tried to do. Like we wanted it to feel always like moody and intense while it teaches you. And it's definitely a good feeling when people get it. And the truth is, like, I think we could have done better. Like, there's certain, like, maybe you didn't have any confusion about what to do, but there's definitely
No.
people who do get confused
Right.
sometimes. And as a designer, it's really hard to know if, like, there's always going to be some percentage of people who don't get it, no matter what you do. And then there's going to be, things that you could have done better. And sometimes it's really hard to decide like how much is enough, or like, have you done your job yet or not? And as a small developer, like we just relied on bringing the game to shows and watching people play it. And a lot of that was a really frustrating experience where like we think it's really simple and we know exactly what to do, and some people just don't get it.
Right.
And like if and the worst thing that can happen is that they get the wrong idea of how the game works. Like they get through something and in their mind they have one understanding of how the game works, but it's wrong. And then
Hmm.
later on, like they realize that it's not working anymore, and it's impossible to get that wrong idea out of their head.
Right.
And in the end, we could have solved this more easily by just adding like a more traditional tutorial, or like putting a bunch of help text on the screen or something, or freezing the game and making you do the right thing. But we tried to just make it all like fully integrated, and I think we mostly succeeded. And fortunately, in the age of the internet, people can ask each other if they get confused. So yeah, overall, I'm very happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, for my money, I think it came very naturally to me because I already played a lot of rhythm games. So when I
Sure,
saw
sure.
the note coming towards me, the very first note in the game, it's like instinctively I pushed that button. It just went along as mechanics were introduced. I can imagine that people who are not well versed with that stuff get a little confused right from the get go.
Hmm, hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that some don't get it. I instantly got it, but I maybe the exception to that rule. I'm not really sure. Like I've just played a lot of those games, so I think I just instantly got it. So I'm not really the right person to ask.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, of course, I'm the worst person to ask, right? Because I've worked on this thing every day for like years, right? So it's just, yeah, it's this tension between like doing what you want as a designer and realizing your vision, but also you have to listen to what other people say. Like
Sure.
other people, might not be able to tell you how to fix the problems, but they can definitely let you know that there is a problem, right?
Yeah. I think that's the biggest issue between like people who play the game and people who develop it. They give you the most interesting feedback because they may give you an idea you never thought really about before.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. Yeah.
it's something to think about. Um, the dark atmosphere and the way everything like was set up gave me a big 2001: A Space Odyssey vibe somehow.
Hmm.
Was this something you were going for, and were there like other influences?
Yes, and there were many influences. So I think that like even before we knew what the game was going to be like, the art direction and the kind of vision was always really strong, and that was a big kind of advantage we had. So Brian is a talented artist, and he was really committed to making something that was really kind of focused and consistent.
Hmm.
We also had one of his friends, whose name is Matt Brinkman, who's a really great artist, do some of the early concept work for like the enemies and like the big giant boss head at the end of each level.
Right.
Um, and so, I think when we looked at kind of at other games, like there's a lot of games that are people would call trippy or psychedelic or something, right? And they were kind of psychedelic in a way that is like, I don't know how to describe it really, but like they're kind of shimmery, or like there's a lot of lights, and it's kind of light and like happy, like euphoric feeling.
Sure.
Whereas we felt like we wanted to explore the psychedelic nature of something like 2001, right? Where it's like this minimalist thing. Like, the movie 2001 has that black monolith, which is
Hmm.
this very simple shape, but in the same sense, it's very imposing, very terrifying. And so we definitely reference that kind of vibe in the game. I think, like, with the pyramid icon that comes back time and time again during the game. Stuff like that was definitely inspirational.
Especially the pyramids instantly gave me that vibe, and it was such a nice touch. Um,
Cool.
the game was first available on PlayStation VR, and to be honest, it was actually the reason I purchased the headset. Um,
Oh,
naturally, the game started outside of virtual reality. How was that? How was that experience like putting virtual reality together?
well, yeah. I mean, I think we kind of just lucked into it. To be honest,
Right.
we've been developing this game for years, right? And we got some really positive feedback from showing it, and we kind of made a deal with Sony to like that it would debut on PlayStation 4 first.
Hmm.
As an independent developer, launching on like just one console is a ton of work. So we just were like, well, we just choose one and focus on that first, and then we'll do the others later. And it also launched on Steam at the same time, so we were already doing two at once.
Sure.
But so we would focus on a PS4 game, and we thought like that would we knew that it was a fun like 2D game, non VR game, and just because of all the marketing and hype behind VR, we thought, well, we should at least try. And I think I was pretty skeptical that it would even work. And it does
Hmm.
work, and I mean, I can maybe talk about why I think it does work, but basically, we didn't start doing PSVR stuff until early 2016. So less, like maybe about 9 months before the game actually released was when we started doing PSVR stuff.
Sure.
And it was kind of in a period of like 3 weeks when we figured out all the kind of fundamental technical issues and design issues about how the game would play in VR. And we just were so lucky that we had a game that translated. The experience works both ways. And I think that was a big advantage for us. And maybe the biggest challenge was just optimization, because on PSVR it's running at 90 frames per second, and it's of course rendering both eyes every frame. So it's like something like 500 million pixels per second or something. Really raised the bar on
Jeez.
performance and really stressed my abilities as a programmer too. But somehow, yeah, we got it all working.
Yeah. I just think it's really impressive just looking up the road ahead at that VR headset. It's just a fantastic feeling, to be honest.
Cool, cool. Nice to hear that.
Um, Thumper has now come to Nintendo Switch, and I must say that I really love this version. I think, in particularly, it looks super impressive in handheld mode. Um,
Hmm.
how did it? How long did it take up to get that running on the platform?
It was a lot of work. And it's kind of, I mean, it was done over a period of about 5 months. Well, actually, I would say more about, yeah, 4.5 months.
I see.
At the same time, I was also working on the Xbox version, which we're going to try to get out very soon too. I was doing other stuff. I was traveling. My wife had a baby, so I've been really busy the past 4 months. But the Switch was really fun to develop for. It's kind of a cool little system. I really like the tools they set up. But it was like it involved writing like a whole new graphics renderer, because it uses a graphics technology that's totally different than both the PlayStation and the PC.
I see.
And then the big challenge was optimization. I mean, like it's no secret what's inside the Switch. It's like this Tegra X1 modified processor GPU, right? It's basically geared towards mobile devices, and that's what the Switch is. So we kind of had to look at I had to look really deeply at what was going on with the graphics, and like how could I make them more efficient? Was there anything that could be like optimized? Anything we could slightly downgrade for the Switch? And in the end, like I think we got it to look essentially like the same as the PS4. There's some minor differences, but we're really happy, and we feel like it's the same experience, which is what we were really trying to do.
Yeah, I definitely think it looks impressive in all areas, and I played through the entire PlayStation 4 version, almost through the Switch version, and I don't really necessarily see a major difference. But honestly, like the big difference for me is just playing it on the handheld screen with headphones in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then that's another thing too. We just didn't know that that would be cool. Like we didn't know that would translate to like that kind of smaller portable screen, but I really like it too. It's just like I mean, I think it's the reason everyone likes their Switch. It's just really fun to have that option.
Yeah, I played through the entirety for the game almost through in a what is it, in a train ride, because I was in a 2 hour train. I played like 3 levels. Then it was like really good.
Cool.
One element that I really like about the Switch version is the HD rumble and the Joy-Con. Sadly, I didn't think it was all that strong in the Pro controller. Was there a particular reason for that?
Oh, well, there's no particular reason. I mean, well, one kind of funny thing is that I didn't have a Pro controller until very late in the development process because I couldn't
Oh
find
man,
one. And it's not a standard part of the dev kit that I got. Um, anyway, but the thing is, like, yeah, the HD Rumble feels different. You know, whether you're holding the Pro controller, whether you have the Joy-Cons docked to the system, or whether you're holding them just in your hand. Like, it feels strongest when you have them detached and you're holding them separately.
hmm
But we have gotten feedback from people that they want it to be more intense in the like basically it's sending the same signals to the motor. It's just the physical property of the controller that's different.
I see.
So what we might do in a patch or something is add like a rumble intensity slider, something like that. I haven't really thought about it. So if people want to crank it up a little bit, they can. You know, ultimately we just decided to kind of do it the same across everything because we wanted it to feel pretty subtle anyway, but based on the feedback, yeah, maybe we'll like let people juice it up a little bit.
I see. To be fair, I mostly play it now with the Joy-Cons detached, which is a very comfy way to play that game.
Oh,
Um,
cool. Cool.
what are your well, we touched on it a little bit. What are your overall thoughts on the platform? Is the system something you could see yourself supporting more further down the line?
I would love to because, like I said, it was a good experience and it was fun developing for it. I like that it's just like a really focused machine. That like it plays games and that's it, and it doesn't ask developers to do too much extraneous stuff. Like I feel like for an indie developer, a lot of people are just making single player, very straightforward experiences, and
Hmm.
a lot of stuff like I mean like people might dislike the fact that the Switch doesn't have achievements or something like that, but I feel like that stuff's not really necessary. It's really just about the game you're making, and
I
that's what
agree.
I like about the Switch. um, and I think it just depends on what our next game's going to be and when we can finish it by. I
Huh.
mean, I certainly hope, like right now I certainly hope that we'll finish this game within the lifetime of the Switch, but who knows? Like when we started Thumper, we thought it would be an Xbox 360 game to give you some perspective. So,
Oh wow. Yeah,
yeah.
that's not happening anymore.
Yeah, right.
um I recently I've let a friend play who wasn't convinced by the game, and after playing like 10 minutes he fell in love with it. And he mentioned something that I've never really thought about before. And he said that this will be one of those games that benefits from a demo, even if it's like a 5 minute snippet. Have you ever
Mm.
considered this for Thumper?
Yeah, we definitely have, and it's something we could still potentially do.
Hmm.
It's cool. It's cool to hear that he liked the game after such a short experience. I mean, the challenge in doing a demo is just that it's extra work because it's not like you
Yeah,
can just put something in the eShop or update it without going through certification and a lot of kind of ceremony. And the same is true of all platforms.
true.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it's sort of like we could spend a couple of weeks doing that, or we could do something new. And so we just kind of have to make that decision. Um, but yeah, it's still something we could potentially do. And yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. I think a lot of people don't really get the game, and it's a hard game. I mean, they don't get the game until they play it, and it's a
hmm
hard game to sort of communicate the experience with. And I mean, I always knew that it would be kind of a niche title. It's not really a game for everybody, and there's also a lot of people who like once they hear a rhythm game, they're just not interested. And there's nothing I can do about that. But overall, we're just like, excited that it's finding an audience, and certainly since it's come to Switch, like so I know so many new people have discovered the game, which feels really good.
That's awesome. Like, how I let him discover the game is I had a Switch in my bag and we were talking about eShop games, and I said from, why don't you check out Thumper? And he was like, I don't know about that. Just pull out the Switch, pull out my headphones, plugged it in, and said from, here you go, just go play it for 10 minutes.
Cool, yeah, that's awesome.
And he was convinced by that, and I think that's how I will let other people discover a whole bunch of new games that way.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
um, so what does the future hold now? Are there any particular projects that you're currently working on?
It's kind of finishing up Thumper. We're doing this extra. We're
Hmm.
doing the Xbox port. We're probably gonna do at least one patch, just kind of for usability, quality of life things, like maybe this Joy-Con rumble thing. If
I
there's any
see.
bugs found, we'll try to clean those up. But then I think that might be the end of Thumper. And I think actually we left a lot on the table. Like we could have taken Thumper further. We could do more levels maybe, but I think the best thing for everybody, especially us, so that we're not so burned out, is to like do something new. And who knows, maybe in the future we'll do new Thumper, but who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to take a break for something you worked on for that long.
Sure.
Is there anything we failed to discuss that you would like to bring up? If not, do you have a last minute pitch to convince people to pick up Thumper?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I think check out Thumper if you're just interested in an alternative take on how music can be experienced through video games. I think that's what we tried to do is we were inspired by a lot of different types of music, like not just pop music, not just rock and roll, not just dance music. And we think that the potential for music in games and the types of experiences you can have with music in games is really large. And we think Thumper is just like one possible shot in the direction in a new direction. So yeah, I hope you check it out.
Well, that concludes, I guess, the interview. I want to thank you all for listening today. First of all, my guest, Mark, for being here.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure.
And I'll see you all on the next one. Bye bye.